Conservative media done right. You're listening to the SHR Media Network.
Get ready for truth bombs, belly laughs, and the kind of accent that turns car into a two-syllable adventure. Here's your host, Sean.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Edge of Liberty right here on the SHI Media Network. That was interesting. You gotta love it when YouTube just does what it wants to do. But we deal with the gremlins and we move on. Welcome. It is January 26th, 2026. Imagine that all at once. Yeah, YouTube has had a lot of problems, and I gotta square away just a few last things. Not gonna get into the show because everyone's yelling at me in the chat saying, "Where are we?" And my poor guest. I've got to make sure he knows where to go, because at 8:30, California gubernatorial candidate Daniel Mercuri will join us. But thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone, coming to the chat. Please remember to respect all the mods and the rules of chat. And thank you to our friends over at chat. Thank you to our mods. If you missed the show earlier, Jersey Joe had a banger of a show. If you get a chance after this, make sure you go and watch the replay of that. First, I'm going to get into the story about the Signal chat in Minnesota and Minneapolis. Cam Higbee just laid it all out. Then Data Republican and a couple other ones just really started to take over and help get the message out. And I'm going to talk about all of that. But first, I want to bring up the fact that you do not hate the media enough, because they put out stories like this. And we talk on this show about them fueling the flames of just anger and vitriol. Then this is the perfect example. ABC News threw this out. Hennepin County Medical Examiner has issued its public data form on the record on the death of Renee Good, ruling the manner of death a homicide. And if you have any idea, and you're half an intelligent human being, you knew that was 100% going to happen. Why? Because in Minnesota, homicide is not inherently criminal. A homicide finding does not automatically mean a crime has been committed. It just says that the person died at the hands of an other. That is what justifies a homicide in the state of Minnesota. This was a very normal report, and it cannot in one way or another decide guilt or not guilt. It just meant that she died in an interaction with another human being, which we already knew. But the media had to phrase it a certain way to make it look like something has been decided. And it's just freaking obnoxious. They do that all the time. It's just infuriating to me. So yesterday morning was an interesting morning if you've been following everything out of Minneapolis. We on this channel and other channels, not just this channel, have said for a long time the amount of organization that it takes to have these protests and these interruptions of what ICE is doing in Minnesota and Minneapolis, to have that many people be able to get anywhere in the city and surrounding areas
Video shows a bus transporting protesters arriving near the Whipple Federal Building in Minneapolis as anti-ICE demonstrations continue.
That doesn't just happen. That's organization, that's funding. And we all knew it was happening on some level, but I don't think we were quite ready. Well, maybe we were. Some of us were, for the in-depth amount of coordination and funding. And I'll talk about the funding before I go to the break. Break's going to be at 8:30 tonight, not at 8:20, because I'm going to give Daniel the whole second half hour, or the second hour rather of the show. But as we dig into these deeper looks inside the organization of these protesters and rioters, you start to realize they're using Signal, numerous groups on Signal. Thousands of people are signing up, right? And they have a dispatch system. They have different patrol areas. They have different units. They have different everything. And if you haven't checked it out, go over to X, look up Cam Higbee, and you'll see this is just an example. Some of the zones are JS South, JS North, Bloomington, South MPLS, South MPLS, which is a different group. And they have people dispatching. They have people moving things out of the way. They have people reporting. And it goes to show you how just in depth it is. And we say it's organized, and we've said this forever. This is clearly organized. And when we brought up Antifa before, they're not a thing. They're not organized, blah, 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 this, that, and the other thing. And then you start seeing this. And it shows us that they're keeping databases on license plates that they believe are ICE agents. And if you listen to some of the recordings and some of the audio that are out there, they're actually running license plates like a police department to see if it's been flagged as an ICE vehicle on these Signal chats. Right? This is beyond just normal everyday organization. This isn't just a protesting group who's just trying to get their voice heard. No. This it's insane. I will tell you that having worked at a medium-sized police department years ago, they probably had better communication back then. I mean, this is bizarre. And there's also belief, because they're identifying the plates as federally owned plates, that somebody in the DMV illegally is feeding information to these people, which that's a whole other ball of wax. That is a whole other level. And that's illegal too. You're not allowed to disperse that information if you work for a city, state, for a police department, DMV, whatever. You cannot do that. And then as the masks started to come off and they started to show all of these different communications and conversations, you saw people starting to freak out. I sent a couple posts around last night. If you follow me on X, you can see it. It's crazy. It's crazy. People talking about leaving for Cuba. A lot of people saying, we're fucked. Now they know everything. No. It goes beyond fucked, because as we talk about the money, which I will here in a few minutes, you start to have to look into, is this a funded thing versus, and we know it is, but if you can prove the funding, and if you can prove the entire point of that funding is to keep congressionally approved federal officers enforcing a federal law that was approved by Congress to try to disrupt the United States, you start having a lot of other legal issues with those sorts of operations, because then it's no longer a protest. You have the right of a First Amendment to protest the government. You absolutely do. There's a limitation on when those protests become unlawful assemblies. That we all know that's a real life thing. But when you start looking at these protests, let me step back a second. As I said, Lawful assembly. You can go somewhere. You can petition the government. You can stand out there with signs. You can write any member of Congress. You can write any person in government you want to complain about what the government's doing. You can say you don't like them. You can say you hate them. You have the right to do all of that. You can form up in front of government buildings until your heart's content. You can hold 1,000 signs, etc., etc. But legally, when you start interfering with federal officers, which ICE and Border Patrol are, that is no longer protesting. That is a different animal. Okay, that is interfering with federal investigations. That is impeding federal law enforcement. There's 18 codes about that up the yin-yang, all the different ways that it is. People may not like that, but that's exactly what it is. And now when you start funding that disruption on a massive scale, and as we get into it, you're going to hear there are officials in the state of Minnesota who are in on these signal chats. There's allegations, still allegations, admittedly, that one of the names in these signal chats, FLAN, is the Lieutenant Governor Flanagan. You have Oren Chowdhury, who is a city councilor inside Minneapolis Ward 12, who's in these signal chats. This isn't just normal shit. And this is, again, all from Cam Higbee. Cam Higbee gets all the credit for this part. This shows you the zones that they've broken it down to. Zone 1, Zone 2A, Zone 3A, 2B, 4A, 4. These are patrol districts that police departments would have. And they're using this as part of their organization and skills. So we start talking about conspiracy and whether or not you can charge conspiracy. A lot of this will play into that. And I know the FBI has already said that they've opened an investigation. They're starting to get warrants. And here's an active dispatch.
White Chevy.
I wanted to play so people could actually hear it. And this is, again, from Cam Higbee. And I will say his name a million times because he did such amazing work on this. Listen to this. This is a dispatch call over the Signal app.
White Chevy Silverado with the newly changed plates with the coexist sticker on the back. We're on Irving and Lake Street going north on Irving. We seem to be the only commuters following. Just wanted to give an update on our location.
Thank you. Do you have anyone in the car with you?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so they just put out that they're trailing a vehicle that they think is ICE. The dispatcher, a dispatcher. You have a dispatcher for these potentially illegal operations confirming the location and asking if she has backup. Holy shit. Let's continue.
Lovely. Thank you.
And we are getting a photo sent to the chat for confirmation.
So they're sending photos now.
This is John 612 that we are at Grand and Lake.
They call out with an identifier on a radio. This is 9612.
Heading toward Irving. We can try and join you.
Thank you, John 612.
Hey, this is Lokito. I'm getting some messages from the WhatsApp group that they're driving around on 28, 29 Pleasant and Pillsbury Avenue. If you want to swing by there first, I'm making my way down that way as well.
And that's the first time I heard, when I heard of this yesterday, about the WhatsApp group. That hasn't even been discussed yet. I don't know if anyone's in WhatsApp group. I know all of these groups in Minneapolis are pretty much compromised by a whole bunch of people who are not part of the original group, reporters and conservatives interrupting them. And a lot of these are being ripped down and a lot of these are being restarted. But I want to play this whole audio because I think it's just amazing the amount of coordination that's going on.
I am on Lake and Park.
I'll relay to the Spanish chat, or sorry, relay to the Uptown Whittier.
Thanks.
Relaying to the Uptown channel. They're leaving the district. They're crossing over.
On the car. It's empty. But
Please go on mute. John 612, please go on mute.
It's going to be a right, the next right.
Lokito, go ahead.
The next right, Chicago.
Yeah, that gray F-150 just drove past me on the opposite way towards Cedar. That was on Lake and Park.
So this goes beyond. This isn't protesting. This isn't, hey, we're all going to meet somewhere and protest the government. This is actively engaging in a conspiracy to interrupt and interfere with federal law enforcement activities. Look at some of these other, I was blown away. Like I said, I was blown away with the amount of coordination that goes into all of this. Look at some of these other plates that are on there. Oh, these other channels. Richfield Discussion, Southside Daily RR, Plates General Chatter, Bloomington General, and then the newest ones are leave and delete, all starting on the 23rd because they knew they were being compromised. So these people aren't doing this for free. I don't get me wrong. There are people out there driving around for free. There are people out there who will absolutely do whatever they're told to do by the Soros left and the progressive left, because that's exactly how they operate. That's how they ended up in this situation. But the people who are running this are not doing it for free. And we know that because I'm going to tell you exactly who they are so far that we know. And it includes foreign officials and judges. So Data Republican took everything that Cam Higbee was throwing out there and said, hey, I'm going to do my Data Republican thing, and I'm going to start digging into this as much as I possibly can. And she did. She found one of their main donation sources that has spiked in the last week going to the protests over there. And it's on a network called Chuffed. Chuffed is an offshore fundraising account, crowdsourcing, if you will. It's headquartered in Australia, and it operates under Australia law. In other words, the U.S. has no subpoena power. They can tell the DOJ, the IRS to kick rocks. There's no KYC rules. In other words, no know your customer rules, no banking regulations, nothing like that. And there's no terms of service that can be enforced by the American government. So they took and said, hey, we can't do this onshore. We have to go offshore with it. Who's this money going to? Well, there's a group called Tending the Soil. Tending the Soil is an alignment of 5 Minnesota groups. Currently building, by the way, a $22.5 million headquarters called the Rise Up Center. But it's also, that group is serving as this command center, according to Data Republican. Now, those 5 groups are completely, you can read about them if you want. You can go to tendingthesoil.com. I'm going to show you everything. They're the Centro de Trabajeros Unidos en el Lucha. If I said that wrong, I'm sorry. Inquilinics, Udex por Justicia, New Justice Project, SEIU 26, and Unidos Minnesota are just some of the groups that are involved in tending the soil. Which is funny because tending the soil means to take care of the ground, but they're not doing that because they're protecting illegal immigrants from being deported. But that's neither here nor there. The first donor on that was an individual by the name of Johnny Sopatuik. Johnny's a Canadian who's worked in and around the Canadian government his entire life. When you dig down into it, over 180 grand alone was raised in January. And 92.5 of the identifiable donors do not live at all in Minnesota. So this isn't the neighbors coming out. This isn't the next door neighbors coming out and bringing tea and coffee, all that stuff. This is money coming from all over the world. And when I say all over the world, I'm going to point out a few people who've been identified. Patricia Ferguson in the United Kingdom, a sitting member of the United Kingdom's parliament, donated to this. Kristen Schneider from Canada, who is a school board member. Sarah Hopewell, who's in the UK as well, who's a district councillor over there. An individual by the name of Benoit Roux out of France, who's the secretary for the French Communist Party. Yeah, the communists are involved. But that's not the only surprising names in all of this. The Honorable Heidi Schultz, who is a sitting district court judge in Minnesota. I'm going to say that again. Donating to this fund and this cause, and they know what it's for because if you go to the page you see it is for the Minnesota protests. The Honorable Heidi Schultz, a district court judge, state senator and assistant majority leader Mary Kunesh, a woman by the name of Rachel Abby Miller. She's an attorney in the state of Texas who happens to work for the Texas Attorney General's office. And also in Minnesota, working for the Department of Corrections, is Kelly Mitchell. She's an assistant commissioner for the Department of Corrections. So now we have the vehicle, right? You have the Signal group apps and all this other stuff that are directing sort of quote unquote the chaos. They're moving people around. They're getting people to where they need to be in order to confront ICE and stop ICE once again from doing their congressionally approved job as an congressionally approved federal law enforcement agency. This is what they're supposed to do. Now, does it have to be this overt? Well, no, as long as the state and counties were cooperating with ICE to hand people over, which I will tell you, when I worked in law enforcement years ago, if you arrested somebody when you processed them through NCIC, you would get a federal detainer warning. It would send you back, say, hey, this is a federal detainer. This is the number. This individual has been identified. Call Immigration and Border Patrol to arrange for us to pick them up. That is entirely an option. I've seen people say numerous times, that's not even legal. They can't do that. No, it's absolutely legal and they can do that. You just don't like the fact that it's legal, and that's tough shit. Okay. So if Waltz and all the counties decided to, hey, we're going to start handing over illegal immigrants for you to pick up and deport, that would lessen the need for ICE to go out into the street and find them. The trade-off to that is these politicians could absolutely say, hey, you have the right to protest, don't interfere with federal law enforcement agencies, and not do it with the wink and the nudge that many of them have been doing. But no, they're encouraging this. As a matter of fact, they're financially encouraging this, which is just batshit crazy to me, to say on one hand, we don't want this craziness in our city, and then to turn around and encourage the craziness. And I know we should be upset that ICE is doing exactly what ICE gets paid to do. And I know there's probably, and I'm not even looking at chat right now because I know the moderators are handling it. But this isn't right because there's no this and there's no, this is the law. This is the law and the way it's been since the 90s. Bill Clinton signed this into law, right? We can get people to kick them out of the country. That's how this works. If the Biden administration hadn't turned around and allowed 11, 14, however million people, the number really has yet to be determined, into the country, these extreme ways of doing this to flood a city to get as many as you can to get them out would not be necessary, but they did. They chose to do that. Why they chose to do that? It's for redistricting. It's to fundraise. They're not stupid. And if you're defending it, you got to ask yourself, why am I defending what is the law of the land? And encouraging the law and being for the deportations and for law enforcement doing this job. I see the term on X and all the other ones thrown around, the typical bullshit that the left does. Anything they can, all of a sudden they're pro 2A. All of a sudden everybody else is a bootlicker. Meanwhile, these are the same people that wore masks as soon as their governors told them to put them on, and some of them still wearing them, driving around in cars with masks on, right? I'm going to say it in the most plain text way as possible, so even the most simple human being can understand this. We were a nation of laws. The founders believed in borders and making sure we knew who came into this country. Yes, we're a nation of immigrants. Yes, legal immigration is fine. It's great. I have no issue with that. There are many people that came into this country that made it fantastic the legal way. The ones who flooded the border here, I'm not even saying they're all bad people, but that does not negate the fact that we have laws. And wanting those laws to be enforced so our country can actually continue to progress and not degress, which it kind of is doing in a lot of ways, is not bootlicking. It's holding on to the founding values of this country to try to make it a more perfect union. Not everyone who gets picked up from ICE is bad, but that doesn't mean that they didn't do it the wrong way. And that's not how things work in our country. If you want to be one of those countries, Go to the EU. There's plenty of countries that allow free migration. They're all for it. It's great. It's working out fan-fucking-tastic for them. Go. That's fine. But in this country, that's not what we do, and that's not who we are. Because no more than you have to pay taxes and do all of these other things in your life, this is part of the law. And you can't go picking and choosing which part of the laws you want, especially when it comes to flooding our country with immigrants. Like I said, it's about redistricting. Democrats knew historically that large amounts of people will migrate to bigger cities. That will get them more seats in Congress because bigger cities have a tendency to vote blue. And then they encourage all of this outrage. So when there's a tragedy, they can jump in front of a camera, just like the seditious six wanted to do when they were encouraging people not to follow illegal orders, which they knew was bullshit. It's so they can fundraise. There was fundraising text going out yesterday afternoon after the shooting in Minneapolis, an hour later, leading back to Act Blue and other places. It's all about fundraising. It's all about taking power and control. And they can't win on policies, so they have to win on moral outrage and emotions. And they have to play because logically they can't succeed, so they play with emotions. And there's so many emotionally charged people. We've seen them because the Democrats, I'll give them credit, they use social media really well. And what they've done really well since about 2008 is said, hey, if you feel a little weird or different, and you guys are in your own little group over there, just come to our group and be weird and different than us. We love you weird and different. Do they love their weird and different? Absolutely not. No more than they love the illegal immigrants. They don't care about the illegal immigrants. They care about redistricting financing. That's it. They just want to fundraise and redistrict so they can try to take more power. But they forget. Over 77.5 million people in this country voted for mass deportations. And whether you like it or not, to quote Barack Obama, elections have consequences. And allowing mass amounts of people into this country was a huge consequence for the Democrats. And you know that because Biden tried to reverse course in the last few months by essentially restarting all of the policies that Trump had that he got rid of day one because they knew they were losing on the policy. They knew that mass migration, mass immigration, illegal immigration was absolutely killing them. The American people did not want that. And the American people spoke. I gotta take a break. I gotta make sure, coming up, 2.5, 3 minutes, Daniel Mercuri, who's running for governor of California, will join me. I'm going to double check and make sure he got the new link because we had, like I said, gremlins at the beginning. So stick around. Please like and subscribe to the channel. Even if you don't like me, come back and argue with me. That would be fantastic. Please respect the mods. Please respect the rules. And thank you to the mods for being absolutely fantastic in chat. We'll be right back.
Welcome to Reaver of Common Sense, where we cut through the noise of news and politics with a sharp wit and clear discussion. Tune in every Monday and Friday at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for a refreshing dose of reality as we fearlessly tackle the tough topics with no nonsense, just pure common sense. Visit shrmedia.com to discover where you can catch Reaver of Common Sense in action. He's here to amplify your inner logic. He may not always be polite, he may not always be refined, but one thing's for sure, he always tells it like it is.
Come listen to BZ's Berserk Bobcat Saloon Radio Show. Live on select and exclusive Tuesday and Thursday nights at 11 p.m. Eastern, 10 p.m. Central, and 8 p.m. Pacific on the SHR Media Rumble channel, SHR Media YouTube channel, X, Twitch, Spreaker, and wherever great conservative podcasts are found. BZ, your conservative Sherpa, guides you through the maelstrom of Democrat, leftist, and globalist lies, chaos, deceit, and betrayal. Raised as a free-range child with dirt, stains, mud, and freedom, BZ broadcasts from North Idaho, comfortably surrounded by actual normal people. Jump into our plush, sumptuous, palatial, and resplendent chat room on rumble.com. Click on live chat to join. Now, with 37% more umbrage and 19% more bulbosity than previous shows, featuring delicious Liberty additives for the best in late-night conservatarian talk radio. BZ reminds you that with great beard comes great responsibility. No chinchillas were harmed, embarrassed, fat-shamed, or the focus of any sarcasm whatsoever in the making of this ad.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Edge of Liberty right here on the SHI Media Network. Thank you so much for joining us. Please like and subscribe. You can also follow me, the number 2 Against Tyranny. It is a pleasure to have with us this evening. I should put myself back on. Huh? That would help. Can't you? Oh, hold on. I know what it's doing to me. There we go. Hold on. Man. It's been a whole night, Daniel, of technological issues that I've been having to force my way through. Mr. Daniel Mercuri, governor, gubernatorial candidate for California, if you will, in 2026. How are you, sir? Good evening.
Thank you. How are you? And I'm hoping you can hear me just fine.
Yep, we can hear you just fine. A little buzzy here and there, but we'll get through it. We'll be all right. I'm doing well. So the website, further, I'm going to put it out right up front. I'm going to do Daniel's work for him. Daniel4governor.com, and that's FOR, not the number 4 that many people like to use. You actually have to spell a little bit to get there, which is okay. We encourage that here on the Edge of Liberty. Daniel, you and I have talked a few times off the air. You are such an engaging person in all the right ways. I will tell everybody before we start this interview, Daniel's one of those people that will absolutely explain to you in a polite, intelligent manner his positions and why, which is unbelievably odd in this day and age, right? But then if you happen to not 100% agree, it's the weirdest thing. You keep discussing. And I want to know, instead of just walking away, slamming the door, or insulting somebody, where did you come up with that tactic?
Honestly, it's probably because I went to when I went to school, I got one of my degrees in speech and communications.
No, and that's what
so everything is.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, everything I think was speech communication for sure. It was always about trying to find the best angle, the best the building bridge to see if we can find some kind of common ground.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times, if you did that in debate, you won the argument, you won the debate because you were able to get your opposition to find that bridge. And so that's really it. It's really to find a bridge.
It's almost like positive political discourse is a healthy thing.
Yeah, right. And it's like that's a lost art nowadays, unfortunately. Give me 1 second. I'm gonna turn my camera off for 1 second.
Okay.
And then I'm going to detach 1 second.
Yeah, no worries. So we're speaking with Daniel Mercuri, Daniel4governor.com, has all of his policies. And I'll tell you something. I know that there's probably a bunch of people in the chat room who are not conservative, but for the conservatives, go to his website and look at his policies. It's absolutely wonderful to see a candidate be honest about so many things and honest in a way that is great for the state and the country, in my opinion. Daniel, start by telling people a little bit about your background and your political history. I hate to say that because you're one of those people I do not consider a politician, even though you're running for office. And I mean that with all the respect that I could possibly give you. But tell everyone a little bit about yourself.
Honestly, I'm just I was born and raised here in California. I was, I went to school here. This is where I swore into the military. This is where, I'm raising my children. It's where I met my wife. There's a lot of things, about California. I'm a Californian native. And I never had any inspirations or aspirations to get into politics. It was just a lot of things were affecting my own businesses that I'd spent 15, 20 years on.
Right.
And, as it was something that I noticed things were affecting my health of my children, more so my daughter, who was diagnosed with leukemia. And it happened to be the area that we live in that was really negatively affecting her. And I noticed that our representatives were kind of sort of just kicking the can down the road. I started looking into school and school choices, and my son was physically abused in the schools. And that was another sort of wake-up moment when the parents weren't really able to decide or know about what in particular the schools were able to what the schools were doing when it came to disciplinary actions with any sort of egregious behaviors. And it really opened my eyes up to just all the corruption and how deep the corruption goes. And I really wanted to just understand why there was no investigations. I wanted to understand why these individuals in office were getting away with what they were doing. And I just didn't understand why we didn't see any prosecutions. There were no indictments. How is it that they can do what they're doing? And that really led me down the rabbit hole of just wanting to understand the laws first. Because I felt like, well, maybe I'm missing something. Maybe I just don't know.
Right.
And maybe I should educate myself first before I go pointing the finger at my representatives. And I don't really know what I'm talking about. And the more I started learning, the more I realized how much they didn't know. And the more I started learning, the more I started realizing how many things lawyers didn't know, and some police officers and other executors and even judges. And I realized, we're in this system that's not designed to support the people, but government body. And that was a real big issue for me. I had a difficult time with that. And so with that being said, I just went down the rabbit hole of the Constitution. So much so that here in California, a gentleman by the name of Mr. Constitution Douglas V. Gibbs rated me during the 2022 prime as 5-star candidate who was the most constitutionalist. And that actually came by way of the people. So I never labeled myself labeled myself a constitution or a constitutionalist. They did. And it just stuck with me, and it stuck, everywhere I go now, simply because I'm using the Constitution as to where my answers would derive if I were to be governor.
And it's amazing because, like I said, we've talked before, and every single time, that's something that you had always fallen back to in your discussions, and you would cite repeatedly, which is just incredibly impressive, because a lot of people don't even know there is a state constitution in California. They know the federal one, and sometimes they wish it wasn't there, but they certainly don't know the state constitution. So you mentioned 2022. You decided to get into it, and obviously it wasn't as successful as you hoped, but you learned a lot from it, which
actually it goes all the way back to 2019 when I ran for Congress.
I apologize. Okay.
All right. And it was that race that opened my eyes up to if there's any change that can really happen in the state of California, it's the seat of the governor. It really is. And I realized that once I ran for Congress, where all the corruption hides and operates, right? Where does corrupt government hide and operate? So much so that I wrote a book about it. And I've been giving out free copies. It's not about the money. It's about waking people up and trying to educate them on what they can do to fight back at the local, state, and federal level. But in order for us to fight back, we have to kind of know how we got here in the first place. And that's kind of what my book is based about. And of course, those of us who are Christians and Christ believers, does some of this tie into biblical prophecy? And I sort of tied into the 4 horsemen, more so the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. I don't go beyond that, but I try to show people how it correlates if you're a believer. And even if you're not, how you can kind of see how these all tie into corrupt government.
Which you don't have to be in California for more than 30 seconds to know that there is a lot of corrupt government in California. There's a lot of crony government. There's a lot of handshakes and backroom deals. Well, I mean, just look at the expansion of the state house right now and how we don't know how half that money's being spent and who got it and where it came from and yada, yada, yada. And that's the ones we can see. I always tell people that. You think about the atrocities government lets you see, and then you have to realize that you're probably only seeing the top 10%, maybe even less, you know?
Oh, yeah.
So
yeah, no, it's terrible. I mean, I didn't even I didn't realize how deep the corruption goes until I started digging, and then how it actually approached me. The corruption actually approached me during during my race for Congress,
Yeah.
and that's when I was like, wait a second, is this how it all works?
So this was a great story, and you told me the last week or the week before. Kind of walk people through this and how your eyes were open when you were running for Congress, because, and without obviously naming any names or anything like that, but uh, tell that experience of like, hey, this is the first real eye opener as to how just kind of mucky things are behind closed doors, please.
So I'll just go into when it affected me, and when I was running for Congress, a lot of times it depends on your district. There's a lot of uncontested districts here in California that our legislature doesn't really care about, or any other branch. They don't really focus on it because there's not a lot of people in that area. They consider it insignificant. And then you have a lot of key areas that are heavily contested because they're key seats that they want to maintain with our representatives. So one of the things is I was just saying the things that I thought needed to be said, while still trying to play that sort of being politically correct. And I started getting contracts in the mail. And I was getting contracts in the mail from super PACs, from unions, lobbyists, Fortune 500s, and rich families, very, very big families here in the state of California. And I'll go ahead and mention the one that was the trigger factor for me was from the Realtor PAC. And it was a super PAC. And so the super PAC, among these other PACs that I can talk about, but these PACs send in an agreement, and these agreements are binding, but they're an exploitation of the contract clause. And most of these contracts sort of buy out your quote unquote representative or soon to be representative or potential representative. And basically these contracts do say in various language that in order for you to get their endorsement, you have to take their money. Like it was written in that. And it was so bizarre when I saw that. I showed my wife and I said, am I reading this the right way? Like I literally have to take their money in order for me to get their endorsement. So if, I thought to myself, well, that can't be. It's basically a flat out quid pro quo.
I think the average person would look at that as such a unbelievably dirty tactic of like, hey, in order for us to play ball with you, you have to take our money so our name shows up in your PAC. And for people who maybe didn't quite understand, this is a legal contract that they're sending you to sign that says if you get elected, you will do these certain things that we are telling you to do.
100%.
This is status quo in the state of California. We can talk about outside California later, but right now we're dealing with the state of California. This is status quo. In other words, these PACs are telling these people, well, here's your money, and now you're going to do these following things for us. And like you said, it is an entire quid pro quo. It is one of the things that I think most people probably don't believe it exists because they don't want to believe it exists.
Mm-hmm.
Like that is when you explain it, it is just so filthy. There's no other word for it, but please continue.
Yeah. So, I mean, you're 100% spot on. So that's why I said this is an exploitation of the contract clause, because down below in a lot of these agreements, there were all these codes, there were all these court cases, statutes, and I never knew anything about the law back then. So I started digging into the law. I started looking at court cases and statutes and mandates and regulations and policies and ordinances. And
which
it just
they hope you wouldn't.
I know, and I just didn't quite understand. Like I didn't understand how this could even function. But then I realized that when you look at the Constitution, it says, and I'll paraphrase Article 1, Section 10, I think it's Clause 1, the contract clause, it says that no states can come up with a law to prevent the obligation of a contract. And it's literally written in that sort of sentence structure in the California State Constitution. I think it's Article 1, Section 9, verbatim. I mean, they literally take that section out and they put it right in the state constitution. And they're basically saying that whatever contract agreement that you make, the courts are going to take the Constitution and going to throw it out. Why? It doesn't apply because the contract has to be fulfilled. So the contract, though it really can't be illegal, if there's verbal loopholes, they can get away with it, right? Because again, it's an agreement. And it's also an agreement to when you look at the 13th Amendment, right? Government doesn't have a right to force you into involuntary servitude.
Right.
But you also have to pay attention to what's not said. Well, what's not said? Well, you can volunteer yourself. So you can volunteer yourself into a servitude by way of a contract. So those contracts are servitude contracts, agreements, accords with these super PACs. So they pretty much buy out your representative before they even get into office. And for me, before I could even think about it, I was already getting phone calls from these PACs. And these PACs were straight up asking if I could use $50,000 before I could even get a word out. And I said, well, wait a second. I did receive your packet. And well, of course I could use $50,000. What candidate can't use $50,000? Well, we're not going to say no. I mean, because a lot of candidates feel like, well, maybe if I get into bed with this devil, I can work it and I'll show them. That's not how it works. You have already bound yourself to this union, to this PAC, and they are the ones who actually control the state. They control legislation that would prohibit our legislators, our executive, and our judges to go outside those agreements. So if I did, or if I said, or I enacted anything, if I were to be elected, that would be contradictory or counterintuitive to that group, then I was actually personally liable per that agreement. So this is why a lot of times, sometimes we see good candidates who do get into office, suddenly they do a 180 and now they have to become a liar. And a lot of people don't understand that, how that happened. And that is because they signed the agreement, they took the money, and now they're part of the status quo. And so nothing changes.
Skin in the game, but in the worst way, because it is absolutely your own skin on the line.
100%. Yeah. And this is what woke me up to who's really running the show and how they sort of use these mechanisms to, steer and puppet master our representatives. So this is why I always thought, how is it that they can get away with what they're doing? And it's because, again, technically under the contract, they haven't violated anything. They have per the Constitution. But the problem is that contract is the exploitation loophole where corrupt government tends to hide and operate. And it took me a very long time to figure this out. Once I figured that out, now I understand how our new candidates, a lot of candidates get their endorsements is because there's an agreement, there's an accord with however much money is left over with the candidate. So a lot of people don't know when a candidate runs for office, and you wonder why. Like, I'll just use an example right now. There's 104 gubernatorial candidates who made a declaration for governor, 34 for Democrats, 35 for Republicans, and 30 no party preference, which is the largest new group that has come onto the scene, is the no party preference. So what they do is if you want an endorsement, well, the Republican Party won't endorse you unless you can raise $1 million or more. And then with that agreement, they will give you an endorsement depending on whether or not they're going to get some of that money left over. And how does that work? Well, the FPPC here in the state of California says you can't keep the money. You can do one of three things with it. You can donate it to your party preference, like the Republican Party or the DNC and so on, or you can give it back to everybody in proportionment to the donations that you receive, which is tumultuous. No one's going to do that. Right. Or you can give it to your favorite charitable nonprofit organization, which is where the money is really made. So a lot of the parties are associated to these nonprofit organizations under the 501. So if that's the case, a lot of times under the agreement, if there's $500,000 left over, let's say I raised $1 million and I made the agreement that I'll give, I won't spend a certain amount and I'll make sure there's a little bit left over for the party. They need to give me the endorsement. So then what ends up happening is they'll make the agreement, they'll sign the contract. Then I will put myself or someone else on that I trust as an advisory member. Under an advisory board member, you can pay them whatever you want. So you can make it quarterly, you can make it cyclical, you can make it annual, whatever you do decide on. You can tell that nonprofit, okay, out of the 500, you can keep 200, 300 goes back to me. And then they'll sign off quarterly to that individual or yourself and then now you walk away. Well, it's perfectly legal. It's just the loophole that nobody really knows about and understands that this is the back-ended hand that's going on behind the scenes when you see establishment picks. This is why a lot of people are like, gosh, I don't know. I mean, I've heard of Daniel, but I just haven't seen him. How come he's not on television? How come you don't see him on Fox? And that's because these agreements with the amount of money that's made, it's a pay for play. And even if you do have the money, a lot of times they want to make sure that there's an agreement. And if there's not an agreement, like Larry Elder,
when he ended a recall, he never got the endorsement of the Republican Party, even though he raised $5 million. Why? Because he wasn't going to give them any of that money. He had his own nonprofit. So he cycled that money just the way everybody else does. And this is how people become what we call perennial candidates. Candidates who run all the time, never win, but they know how to campaign fundraise. And that's how they make their livings. And a lot of times, sometimes they bounce and they couch hop between states running for office. It's just how they make their living.
Yeah, I know there's a couple of those that have shown up in the California governor's race. I don't have them offhand, but I saw them in the pack. It does really make me wish that I got into campaign advisor for a full-time job as a young man, because I'd probably be living a much better life. No, it's just absolutely crazy. So you've seen all of this. You get your foot in the door as far as seeing this corruption and obviously not wanting to play ball with it, which I commend you for entirely. And then you run again 4 years ago.
I immediately ran. So I started June of 2019 when we started having fires. They started earlier in the year, and when the fires were happening, again we had I moved to Ventura County, and I moved near the Ronald Reagan Library, and the Woolsey fire took place that eventually burned up the remaining Santa Susana laboratory, nuclear laboratory.
Yep.
And this area is, probably one of the largest, heaviest radiated areas, anybody in California can live in. It was sort of California's version of Chernobyl. And it was a big lockdown, a lot of hush-hush behind it. I only know this because a lot of the moms created this group that's fighting back to get the land cleaned up properly. But it's only been, here we are 65, 70 years later, and government has kicked the can down the road. And all these kids have been diagnosed with childhood leukemia. My daughter was one of them. And so, in fact, so much so, 2 families moved into my neighborhood about the same age as my daughter. And about 2-3 months later, their children were diagnosed with leukemia, which is statistically impossible without a cofactor.
Right.
So, so after that, I immediately, the race ended in March of 2020. And that's when I knew I needed to either bow out completely or I'm going to fight this. And I thought to myself, I need to fight this for my children. This is where I live. I grew up in California, and it was so just heinously corrupt. I was like, I can't stand idly by. I've got to do something with what I know. So I threw my hat in the ring into the 2022. It just so happened that the recall took off. So of course it was advantageous for me to throw my hat in that ring, and I made the ballot for that. And that's when I really started getting contacted by the GOP. But the GOP didn't want me to play ball. They never had a candidate at that time ever host their own debate where the candidates had a stake in the question. And I actually got AM 590 The Answer here in California with Jennifer Horn and the late great Don Dix. They actually helped out host it, and they also helped out with moderating it. And so that was big news for the GOP, because they're like, who's this candidate that's getting these radio stations to help out? Nobody knows him. What connections does he have? So they were like, what magic does he got? They were just intrigued with the idea of what I was doing, that the candidates had to go out and find top 3 questions. And that when they sent it back to my campaign, everybody was going to see who sent in what. So if there was any discrepancies, anybody could say something. And nobody did, because it was open.
Yeah, it's transparent, right? You can't complain when you can see all the data.
Exactly. And then everybody could bring any answers, notes, whatever you wanted, and you're going to know the questions in advance. It's not like I can't answer the question without anything in advancement. I mean, I've been at this for so long. But, I didn't want to put anybody at a disadvantage. So it didn't look like there was favoritism. And so that was a big no-no to the GOP. They didn't like that. In fact, they kept calling my campaign manager at the time, Justin. And Justin was, feeling like he was a little, out of his league. And they kept calling him, saying, we really like Daniel. We like what he's doing. But, we feel like we need to give him some handlers. He's untouched veteran. No one's ever, talked to this guy. No one's ever touched this guy. We really like what he's doing. He's clearly, rattling the right and wrong cages. Let's give him some handlers. And my campaign manager was like, well, I don't know if you know Daniel, but no one's going to handle Daniel.
Yeah.
But sure, we can try. You can talk to him, but I don't think he's not going to fly with him.
But they wanted to get their hooks in.
They did, and so when they called me, I said enough. I told because they had called him like 6 or 7 times, And I said, let's just have a Zoom. And I wish to God I recorded it because it turned into a big screaming match. And finally, this one individual who actually helped get Reagan into office here in the state of California, he's still kind of operating behind the scenes at the GOP. He basically divulged all the information that the GOP and the DNC actually do coalesce with each other. And they wanted me to help fundraise and use my veteran status as a way to do that. And I had asked, well, am I going to get the ability to speak in some of these, dinners and these fundraisers? And they said, no. And I said, well, that's going to look,
walk away.
Yeah. And they said, I was like, well, that's going to look like I'm acquiescing to whoever it is that you endorse. And they go, well, yeah, that's the point. But we're going to build you up over the next 10 years. And this was back in 2020. And I was like, no, we don't have 10 years. I go, everything's so hugely corrupt. So long story short, I didn't agree with it. And that's when they really lost their cool with me because I wasn't going along. I wasn't going to go along with their agenda. They deliberately said for me to stop talking because the things that I was saying was disrupting their ability to raise funds because I was divulging how they do it. And so I've gotten a lot of blacklisting or blackballing or, a lot of naysaying and stuff. But I took, party. Yeah, from my own party. And that's what I tell people. That's why a lot of people are like, they're like, you just got to get their endorsement. I don't care for the GOP endorsement. Yeah. I've gone around the state of California for 6.5 years now. When this race ends, it ends in June. It will be literally 7 years, almost to the day, that I was spent campaigning around California. I have had 1 to 5 events a month, even in the off season. I never stopped campaigning, running on my own dime. I've gone as far as, Del Norte and Siskiyou, all the way down south to San Diego. And I've been everywhere in between. And of course, there's 483 cities in the state of California. I've been to over 242 of them. And I've even cycled back to a lot of these groups, just and noticing that nothing has changed with these groups. And so I've become a thorn in the GOP side, meaning I'm that candidate that they can't get rid of because, well, me by organic following now. They know me by just an organic, campaigning that I put on PowerPoint presentations, educational forums, town halls, and I did it on my own dime. And they all love my knowledge, but they are the last people that want to support me because they go back to the old playbook. And that playbook is, well, do you have $1 million? And can you get more endorsements, like from private and union companies? They want me to get endorsed by unions. And the unions are the ones who are at the core of everything wrong in our state. And Agreed. I'm like, no, I'm not going to do that. And so they block me from going to forums, debates, and or if they do invite me, it's always at a disadvantage, or they try to put me at a disadvantage. So I've gone around anyway. So now I have a grassroots pull that even I spoke to Chad Hilton Chad Bianco and Steve Hilton that they've even acknowledged that wherever they've gone, and they're kind of upset about it in the sense that some of my followers and supporters have said to Chad directly, even if you win, I'm not going to vote for you. I can't vote for you. You have too many red flags. I'm voting for Daniel Mercuri. And he was like, so even if I make top 2, you still wouldn't vote for me? And they've said yes. And he was like, we need to win this state, Daniel. And he's like, and I've got the most money. And I was like, the fact that you were mentioning your money is everything wrong.
Yeah, it is. It's not a good look when you do that whatsoever. And I will say your supporters are very enthusiastic. I've seen a lot of them. I follow a lot of them. I've spoke with some of them. So as you come through, and I want to get to this year's campaign because I want to get you a platform. Folks, you're watching The Edge of Liberty on the SHR Media Network. Gubernatorial candidate for California, Daniel Mercuri, joins us. We are not going to take a break. We are going to go in a little bit of overtime because we're just kind of scratching the surface, and I want Daniel to be able to tell his story. So you're welcome to hang around all you want. I hope that you do, because I think this is something that will absolutely open the eyes to not just California elections, but elections throughout the country and how they kind of work. Because if it's happening here, it's happening everywhere, most likely. So you early in your political career, you get shown the contract scheme. And then when the GOP finally comes knocking, they show you that they're the uniparty and that you're going to essentially just do nothing but raise money for them. They want you to be a talking head, assuming that you're just probably like a lot of other politicians where it's like, hey, as long as I get some fame and some money out of this, I'm doing okay. We talked about the candidates that bounce from state to state and they just do nothing but campaign, which is such an outstandingly insane way to make money, in my opinion, but that's just me. And now we come to this election, and you mentioned Steve Hilton, you mentioned Chad Bianco, who right now are what you would call the traditional establishment candidates.
Yes.
You have Steve, who's more center right than right, and then you have Chad, who is, by all accounts, the current Republican establishment candidate by design, so to speak. I'm not saying that he's the chosen one. I'm just saying that if you think about what the current Republican candidate would be, Chad kind of checks a lot of those boxes. And then there's a bunch of other, and we're not going to name them all, but I want to know about Daniel Mercuri, because as I said before, I think once people know more of you, the more they're going to like and respect you. So you're a veteran, you're a dad. You are a black belt in jiu-jitsu, correct?
Yeah. I actually used to grapple back I still grapple. I still coach. Been grappling for 21, 22 years now.
It hurts
second degree. So
it?
I actually used to grapple back in the day, the old school first season of The Ultimate Fighter. The guys like Stephen Bonner, Forrest Griffin. I've even grappled quite a few times with Joe Rogan, 10th Planet, Eddie Bravo. He was actually my first professor, was Eddie Bravo. So a lot of the guys from the earlier days in the UFC. Chris Riley, who also was Rampage Jackson's coach during, I forgot what season that was. I've actually grappled in Rampage. He was a blue belt back then. I did. He's a monster, but he doesn't know anything about grappling. So you could choke him out quite easily. But interesting thing though is I always tell people, when you eliminate an Ultimate Fighter guy's arsenal, they become at a disadvantage, right? If you say only boxing, a lot of them suck at boxing. If you say only grappling, a lot of them suck at grappling, right? Or if you just say wrestling, right? Because it's only wrestling, right? It's one discipline. But the minute you say you can use it all, now they're monsters. And so they know a lot of various fight skills. And so, but they're all tremendous athletes, wonderful, individuals too. Some of the most easiest going guys I've ever, grappled, been in the cage with just for fun. But they're still beasts. And, I remember, Matt Danzig, Carl Parisian, like I'm name dropping here, but these were the guys back in my day. And I have grappled them quite a bit. Joe Rogan actually, when he was back doing his Fear Factor days, Joe actually, I remember Eddie's classes were so big because he called it 10th Planet Jiu-Jitsu. It was kind of a norm, and he was known for beating one of the Gracies. And I can't remember, was it at Abu Dhabi or something? And so he was my first coach. And I remember Joe showed up, and I didn't really know Joe could actually grapple. I'm only about 5'9" on a good day. He's a little bit shorter than me. A little shorter than I am, but he's stacked. And I didn't know anything back then. I was a white belt. I think he was a brown belt. And we would just grapple. And it got to the point where it was 5 rounds of grappling with him. And everybody else is off the mat and he's dripping wet. And I'm just sitting there and he's already tapped me out, 4 times. And I'm looking at him because I don't know anything yet. I'm still just kind of a willful rag doll. Right. And I look across from him and he's looking at me. He's just staring at me like say it, and I look at him and I go, and I'm not kidding. I look at him and I go, 1 more round. And he goes, that's what I was looking for. So we get back on the mat and we grappled and stuff. And then, luckily I was like, you're not going to tap me this time. And when that was good, because he was like, good, that's the point, right? Even if I can't tap you, I would be curious as to what it would be like today. Here we are, I am 21 years later at a second degree. I eventually moved over to schools. I became, an amateur MMA coach. I already had boxing background from the military. And then I started coaching MMA because I was actually preparing to get into the cage. So I had a lot of smoker matches. But then I had suffered a number of injuries. I had blown out both my knees. I fractured 2 ribs. I have a 3-time deviated septum.
Oh, gosh. Fractured
my wrist. I was already beat up then just from the military. The military, injured my back. Military injured on my knees, the things I did in the military too. So, at that time, I was just a glutton for punishment.
Right.
And I didn't know any better. I kept feeling like that's what I needed to do. Now that I'm older and hindsight, I suffer the consequences, but, I'm a much more slower grappler. I actually coach people on how to have longevity in the sport, especially at, I'm 50. So at 50, I still grapple with 20-year-olds. And I, make sure I play to my strengths, and I don't, match speed for speed because, well, I don't have a gas tank like they do, not as flexible as they are. But in that instance, those are my old days.
At our age, you have to think about your approach to a lot of things very different. Grappling and fighting and all of those things is entirely different than when you were 22 and you could bounce back immediately and go for God knows how long. Yeah. And I did bring that up because I think that, and I've heard you talk about that before, so I actually had a purpose with bringing up your jiu-jitsu, is I think you apply that to your candidacy, right? You've obviously matured, understanding the system, understanding how to be yourself and deal with the system. I don't even want to say play within the system because I think that's giving the system too much credit. And you are now this wiser candidate. You know the pitfalls that are out there. You know how to avoid them. And now it comes time to connect with people. And we go to your policies. And this is the thing that I really want people to pay attention to, because in California, so many of these things, and if you're governor tomorrow, let's say that I am this magic genie, which nobody wants to see me without a shirt, and that's fine. And you're governor tomorrow, what's the first thing you tackle?
My first thing that I always, and I've always said it, is we need to ensure that we protect our children. And that's a multi-layer umbrella when I talk about children. Some of the first things is to ensure that we don't impinge upon any further parental rights that we've already engaged upon. We make sure that we institute a full moratorium on our borders. And that doesn't just mean borders as to what's coming into the state. We also need to be mindful as to what's going out. A lot of children are being sex trafficked, not just into our state, but also out of our state. And CPS is, of course, engaged in kidnapping and part of this ring. That doesn't mean the rank and file is all entirely bad, but there's a lot of clandestine groups within the CPS and, of course, family court that has ripped children away, and then they go missing. I mean, we have tens of thousands of children in California missing and wondering where they go. We have streets down over by Figueroa. We also have down south where I spent time knowing where the children go or get kidnapped, and then they sort of put them in a holding area near a lot of these bizarre street corners, that are tented, where the homeless are at. But that's also where a lot of children are being held or kidnapped victims, and yet the police can't go in there because of the laws that we've implemented. So they actually call other agencies that I've actually learned about, because those people can go in there because, well, they're not law enforcement. They're not bound by corrupt legislation. So a lot of our local law enforcement give tips to these individual groups to go in there and try to find these children or missing victims. And so that's one of the first things that I plan on implementing. And of course, indoctrination with our children, ensuring that what comes into us, into our San Francisco Bay and Los Angeles docks, we don't just investigate 1 or 5% of those containers, but all of them. And anything that does come in that we catch that brings in paraphernalia, whether it's weapons, drugs, humans, children, that those countries will no longer be able to administer anything into our state of any goods and services, which the state can do. And that's at the executive level. So really, when it comes to children, we're going to make sure that we ensure that we protect our children, because, well, what are we doing if we're not going to pass down the blessings of liberty to our posterity? It makes it pointless. It's mute. And, one of the other things too, is we have all these laws that have been drafted and passed that do nothing but criminalize the victim and victimize the criminal. Mm-hmm. And they ensure that the predator and the pedophiles, have a way out. They have an excuse.
Yeah. That I will tell you that's how you know you live in an upside down state, when you have predators who have more protection than victims. And California has several laws like that on the book, and it's frightening. So the ones that went on this year, you and I could probably do a 4-hour show on just those. Oh, yeah. You brought up the docks in the ocean, because I think people, as much as they know the Pacific Ocean is right there, I don't think that they completely understand how many goods go in ships go in and out through our docks in this state alone. And what a lot of people don't know about ships is they're not vetted nearly as much as aircraft and other ones when they dock. A lot of times They might, usually the Coast Guard will probably scan them for explosives or something on the bottom side of the ship on the way out. They'll make sure that they have their manifest if they stop
Yep.
them, and that the paperwork looks good.
Yep.
And everyone thinks it's those giant container ships that you see that come into, like you said, LA and San Francisco. How many smaller ships that are supposed to be taking out junk metal or bringing in junk metal or all this stuff that are stopping at these smaller ports? I saw this a lot when I worked law enforcement in Boston. You'd get these medium-sized ships that are rush ships, we used to call them, because that would show up to these private docks, and then all of a sudden 35 people would jump out of the hold and start running. And vice versa. If people want to leave the country, they would get onto that boat to get out of the country. So
Yeah.
I'm glad to hear you say that. And again, out of all the eye-opening things that politicians don't talk about, I'm glad you brought that up tonight. So obviously protecting the children is huge. And I know you got like 17 other policies, and I'm going to try to give fair time because I think they are important. I mean, I'm not just saying that because you're on the air with me. This is the stuff that makes or breaks a candidate. We hear so many about the buzzwords and the ones that make the news, and everyone wants to talk about, well, right now immigration is the biggest one, right? I mean, that's the one that
I was actually just on an X at 5:00 today with a libertarian group, and that was top line. It was immigration, ICE, and some of the issues that are going on. But there are countless subject matters that have not changed. They're at the core. But yeah, there's so many issues, especially California. I mean, we really are. I always say California is at the epicenter of everything gone wrong in this country, truly, in my personal opinion.
Yeah. So let's say you've accomplished taking care of the kids, and you got to start going down the Daniel list. So what's next for you on that? Like, I'm trying to let people know what your real priorities are. I mean, there's so many things in this state that need to be fixed. It's almost, it's like you don't know which fire you're going to put out first when you walk through the door, right? But I know you probably have thought about this 45 billion times. So you have a list. What would be next for you?
One of the first things I think is we need to push back with our corrupt judges. We talk about the legislative body, we talk about voting them out of office, we talk about executors, our sheriffs and so on, but we rarely talk about judges. And the only time you really hear about it is mainly the issues that we've got going on with family court. And there is a handful of groups that I'm actually in contact with right now that are actually doing exactly some of the stuff. I've got videos on it that people can find where I talk about rogue judges and, some of the things that we here in the state of California can actually do when it comes to pushing back to, corrupt judicial branch representatives. And we just don't do it. Everybody thinks that judges are supposed to be quote unquote nonpartisan, but that's actually not true, because even judges, unfortunately is because they're still established bar members. Even though they have to unassociate themselves from relinquishing their license once becoming a judge, they still have to adhere to court edicts that usually the lawyers have, and the Bar Association, the American Bar, has actually established. So it's not really the judges, but the Bar Association. They've established court edicts. And so we think judges are nonpartisan, but they have to swear an oath, fortunately, to their oath to the Constitution. So that makes them partisan, because that's what they're here for. They're here to ensure that the Constitution stays intact, just like the legislative body and the executive body, right? You can't do any of those three. You have to stay within the confines of limitations. And a lot of them actually have been creating law, or they have just been making rulings that are completely egregious, that aren't in alignment with what they can and cannot do and under vested authorities. So we've got rogue judges here in the state of California that are more or less activist judges. And again, if we don't have justice, well, then we have a real problem, because a lot of times we depend on the courts to, be debated on subject matters that, are very contentious, especially like when it comes to immigration, or, when it comes to pedophilia and, all these horrendous things that happen, child trafficking, people who are buying the children, who are selling the children. And yet we split hairs with legislation. That's not how it's supposed to be. So we have problems with judges here. And the Judicial Performance Committee is listed out inside the California State Constitution, and is comprised of 11 bodies. 4 of them can be appointed by the governor, which a lot of people don't know. So those appointees can also be assigned to an appointed judge that the governor does regularly throughout the state, because of the fact that we have a lot of judges every year that are retiring. And so So we can easily tie them into the Judicial Performance Committee, then are required to ensure that an investigation tied to an undersheriff in every county, not the sheriff, but the undersheriff. Because the undersheriff, again, still has to report to the sheriff, but the problem is that if you make the sheriff, there could still be some sort of tie-ins. And an undersheriff still has a responsibility in making sure that the sheriff is held accountable. And in doing so, we also have to separate our sheriffs from being coroners, because again, that's a conflict of interest when they're both, which we have a lot of that. In fact, Chad Bianco is one of them. He's both sheriff and coroner, and they're supposed to be separate. And even though we have laws that have allowed for that, again, it's a conflict of interest when you need an investigation, when, again, there's any sort of acts of depravity, laundering, misconduct, fiduciary delinquency. So there's a number of things that we need, that I'm going to do when it comes to being an executor and getting our judges in line. And again, because I know this, and I spent 6.5 years figuring out what I can and cannot do and how I can subject them to a number of not just investigations, but expulsory mannerisms, that they'll no longer sit in that seat. They'll be removed. They'll be benched. There's a number of things that we can subject these judges to ensure that they start playing fair until we can start getting them removed. And then, of course, we have a grand jury here in the state of California. The problem is we've removed their grand juror ability, in other words, to force investigations under fiduciary delinquency. So in other words, when a judge engages in some sort of abuse of authority or criminal misconduct, this is where a grand juror comes in and performs the investigation, hands that investigation over to the sheriffs and also to a superior court judge to force the hands of the investigation expeditiously. When that happens, that's when you can get your indictments. That's when the Judicial Performance Committee is supposed to come in and say, you can't do anything until this is done. And there's more bodies involved. And this is what we miss, because we removed that grand juror in the state of California to having any authority. But it's also written about, I learned more about this by Justice Scalia in his writings, in his books, because I've had to go down there. I've had to understand, wait, if I'm going to be an executor, I think I need to understand all three branches, at least to the best of my ability, because everybody is feeling corruption, right? Parents can't get justice, right? Laws are being passed that we know are heinously egregious. And we've got a bunch of executors who are supposed to execute the law that are pointing the finger and sitting on their hands. What are we missing? Right? Nothing is happening here. There's everything is falling on deaf ears. And we wonder why emotions are running wild.
I will tell you straight up, you had me at removing judges. I did not think that somebody would be talking dirty to me tonight, but I was wrong. No, but I agree. And it is, I mean, the entire California judicial system as a state needs a hard look at. There's so many issues, and that you have DAs who are intentionally not prosecuting. You have judges who are intentionally either throwing cases out that shouldn't be thrown out, and or giving out sentences that are completely unrealistic. One way or the other, it is a hot mess. So the judiciary is huge, and I'm gonna guess, because it is a huge problem in the state right now. Gosh, is it taxes or homeless? What's number 3 on Daniel's list? I'm gonna go with taxes first.
Well, taxes for sure. But let me backtrack real quick. When you talk about DAs, they're also a big problem, because they're tied to our judges, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if we look at supposedly quote unquote officers of the court, one of the issues that a lot of people don't know about, when I was pulling documents, which a lot of people don't know how to do this in the state of California, it's a big process. Intentionally. And it was incredibly difficult for us to figure it out, because we were pulling oath of offices and their signatures. We were pulling their bonds. Per the state constitution, they're supposed to have a fiduciary or good fidelity bond, not just criminal liability, which is illegal under our state codes. I had to take a long time to look all this up. I have a very small team that are very dedicated individuals researching this kind of stuff. And then when we came to the Stonewalls, when we were trying to pull more documents on some of our representatives at the county level, a lot of the county clerks or DAs were getting in the way. And they would try to play, word games with us where, well, we weren't privy to, there's, certain privileged information that needs to be secured. We needed to go through, other channels. And finally, one of the tricks was we then attached our request with a licensed attorney's number. And once we did that, then, and that if they didn't move forward, we were going to file a complaint with the bar if they didn't provide the necessary information within the time frame per the state constitution and state codes, which was within 15 days. And as soon as we did that, we immediately started getting paperwork.
Because
it just
suddenly,
yeah, because they didn't realize we knew, right? They were playing the court edicts. This is what lawyers do, right? They're sort of the gatekeepers before you can get to judges and documents that you really need. And this is one of the other things that we're going to do too, is this sort of court edict that really DAs aren't there enforcing either. They're not there for justice. They're there for law and legal loopholes, and the two are not synonymous. Justice and the law have never been the same, and unfortunately for us people, right? Because they operate under a commercial activity, and we operate as a people under the supreme law of the land for justice under the 5th, 6th, and 7th Amendment, which is divvies up the courts by civil and criminal. So what are we missing here? It's the DAs. The DAs are those gatekeepers that block anything that would provide anybody with some sort of justice through legal loopholes that they know about and you don't. That's why they don't like self-litigators. So I would be changing a lot of that to ensure that people are getting justice and not being subjected to legal loopholes.
Yeah, and it's hard because while an educated self-litigator could go a very, very long way, the unfortunate part as it stands right now, if you are not educated and you try to self-litigate, you're just might as well walk yourself down the aisle.
100%.
So
but yes, your third one was taxes.
That's my guess. Is that number 3 for Daniel or what?
Absolutely. I mean, when we look at taxes, let's just say it. It's we are being, it's taxation without representation, right? It's the whole reasoning behind the Boston Tea Party, right? Because our representatives weren't being represented through Parliament, with the crown, and so they just threw that garbage into the lake. They were like, screw it, we don't want it. But that's kind of what we're experiencing. That's not even kind of. We are. We're not just being, double taxed, we're triple taxed, we're being quadruple taxed.
Oh, yeah.
And it's absolutely insane to the amount of taxation that we're having to endure here, that the government just continues to write themselves, the authority that they can do this. I mean, I love the, back it was in 2024, during the presidential election, we had the initiative that came out, which was the Taxpayer Protection Act. What's crazy is the Taxpayer Protection Act met all the requirements, got all the signatures, and it should have made the ballot. But it was removed from the ballot by Justice Liu, who was appointed by Gavin Newsom. And when he removed it from the initiative from the ballot because he said that it was a shared responsibility of the budget between the legislative body and the people. That meant that he actually created law, because that wasn't true. When you look at the California State Constitution under Article 2, it does say that all political power is inherent in the people. What does that mean? That means we have the final say.
Right.
That means that government derives their just powers from the consent of the governed. It's not a shared responsibility of any kind. It was that Taxpayer Protection Act was to ensure that the people had the final say if whether or not we were going to continue to fund whatever it is that they were going to subject us to. And if the local district said no, or the people of that region under a vote said no, then they weren't going to get their money. So Justice Liu removed that egregiously and illegally and violated his vested authority. So then by way of initiative, which is exactly what we followed under the state constitution to update or change the constitution, the people did exactly what they should have done. And so now we have corrupt government where we can't even get something in as on a ballot measure, or then we're dealing with, corrupt, integrity to our elections, right? We need an election reform. So taxes is something that they don't want us to mess with because of the amount of debt that the state is in.
Oh, gosh.
Predominantly with state, right? So just look at Gavin Newsom. When Gavin Newsom came into the state of California as the governor, there was roughly $100 billion surplus, give or take. And now we're negative $70 billion in deficit. That's the largest that the state has ever had. So he not only spent the $100 million that went missing, but he overspent $70 billion more, and then still wants to call us the fourth largest economy. Well, we're almost insolvent. So
yeah. I first and foremost, I want to touch on that in a heartbeat. But I want to go back to the Taxpayer Protection Act. It is amazing in the same breath that did not make the ballot. Prop 36 passed. The voters wanted it hands down. It won with probably I'm not 100% certain, but I'm pretty sure one of the biggest gaps that you've seen between a pass and no pass on a major bill in a long time. And now instead they just don't fund it. And that shows you that even when you do get something through, the mechanism of a corrupt government can come in and say, I know the people want this, but we don't like that because it's icky and it doesn't make our politics look good, which is why they do it. It's all about their, when I talk about immigration and the left right now, I always say it's all about redistricting and fundraising. They don't care about illegals. They don't care about ICE. They don't care about people getting shot. They don't care about any of that. It's redistricting and fundraising. Same thing with Prop 36. They don't. That's why Gavin tried to throw out that fake I'm going to make things tougher, like 2 months before the vote, where he added back a little bit of some of the laws and then said, look at me, I'm really all about law and order. And the state still said, no, you're not. We all know. So I just wanted to touch on that because I wanted to show that even when it does pass, the people's voice do not get heard in the state. You bring up the 70 billion in debt. Holy, I know you're a good man and I don't want to cuss in front of you.
No, I'm a Navy man. I'm not perfect.
I will tell you that for a state that brags so much about it, the amount of money that it makes, and for us to be 70 billion in debt, not only Newsom did what Clinton did back when he quote unquote balanced the budget back in the day, right? When he wanted to make it look for himself. So he made, hey, I balanced the budget. And then all of a sudden, everything that he kicked the can down the road started to come back and kick our ass on. And that's exactly what Newsom did. He spent all of this money into a budget that's barely going to touch him at the end. I think this is going to kill him when we know where he's going next running. But the next governor, the next administration that comes in is now porked. And part of me says they must have known it was going to be a Republican and they wanted to dump this on their lap so they had to deal with it and make them look bad, whoever it may be, just understanding that whoever's in that office next probably won't have a D next to their name because of Newsom.
No, I totally agree with that.
They were setting this up for a punt. And
if you think about it, and I know a lot of people are like, gosh, why would you want to take on this undertaking of
that was going to be my next
$7 billion deficit? How would you fix that? Honestly, it's a very quite easy fix. We talk about gosh, I'm slipping my mind here. When we look at all these climate changes, all these clandestine groups that are trying to make sure that we go green, exactly, right. So we have all these projects, but one of the things that contributes greatly to the state revenue is, and I'm not a big fan of state revenue. There's a minimum to that, right? In other words, the state only needs what it needs to function, and anything more than that is extortion. And so when we look at what the state is doing and what they're doing with the money, that surplus actually was taken from excise tax. They borrowed from excise for the last 10 years. That's how we were able to get a surplus. And in part, okay, great, maybe we did that. We shouldn't have done that. That was maybe a little too much. And I'm being facetious about that. But when we look at that, then that should have safeguarded the state greatly from any other kind of collapse, any sort of heinous situation, fires, things like that. There's plenty of money.
Something dramatic.
Exactly. That money, it was. And where did it go? Of course, again, this is rhetorical. So one of the things that the state can easily do to get out of this is, we have the San Joaquin oil pipelines, right? And they go for miles. Mm-hmm. And the issue behind that is that they're not operating at 100% capacity, right? We have oil fields with, these orphan wells, and we have these plugged wells and stuff like that. The problem with them is that oil has already been pulled to come up. Even if you plug it, you're going to start seeping outwards and start killing the vegetation. And so if it doesn't continue to operate, it sludges up to the point where it's going to stall. But that's miles of poison. And so it needs to keep moving. Well, right now it's only operating at roughly 7 to 8% capacity. But that 7 to 8% capacity contributes over $300 billion to the state revenue, right? So if that's not moving, you're not getting that $300 billion. So one of the things is, imagine if you opened it full capacity, right? You unplug all of these orphan wells, you get back to maintaining them the way they're supposed to. California is going to start competing globally with this oil reserve. The problem is that, and I put a video out on this, I don't know if you've seen it, but California actually imports oil. And we import oil from Ecuador and from Saudi Arabia. We used to do it with Russia, but the problem is the war with Russia and Ukraine kind of disrupted that. And so, but we kept importing it. And so what we do is we forced our gasoline companies, our refining companies here, the manufacturers, to make very refined, almost impossible special gas to prevent, exactly, to prevent, climate change and climate crisis and global warming and global boiling and all this nonsense in the words that they keep using to try to fearmonger everybody. And so what do? We import it in anyway. So then we import the oil that's supposedly refined in exactly the way that meets our standards in another country that they bring to us, and then they charge us, that country, at a premium that we now have to pay double, triple, or quadruple, which is why it's so expensive at the pumps. And if it's so expensive at the pumps, right, where we've had, Exxon just left. They were here for 146 years. The issue is that they're
Phillips,
having to,
or behind them, or Conoco, whichever, I forget which two. Phillips 66 or Conoco, one of the two is out the door in April.
Yeah. So again, so it's forcing the hand.
Oh, did we lose Daniel? I believe we lost Daniel. Hopefully he comes back. I hope he didn't. There he is. I thought I said something.
No. Did I blip out?
Yeah, you blipped out a little bit, but we got you up to the point where we were talking about Phillips and Conoco leaving, and then that's where we lost you.
So in that instance, we have basically our state thrives on oil. Everything thrives on oil. We need oil for a great multitude of things, whether it's agriculture, farming, heating, you name it, right?
Right.
A lot of even when we want to go green and we want solar panels and we want to, make these big batteries and stuff, the problem is they still require some sort of combustible engine that requires oil. So it's sort of a catch-22. And so here we are having to double charge us. Yeah, it's enslaving us here in the state of California with these outside, vendors that then basically take our natural resources, refine it for us, sell it back to us at a premium. It's such backwater nonsense, and it's a lie for us going green. And we have the natural resources here. So that money alone.
And we would do it cleaner.
We would do it cleaner. We would do it faster. We would be more competitive, and we wouldn't be the fourth largest economy. We would be the first largest economy because of the amount of natural resources we have. Desalination. We have like 15 desalination plants. The problem is they require one primary source in order for them to function properly: energy, kilowatts. But we've shut down clean energy like a lot of our nuclear power plants. Why would we do that? We're sitting here crying going green, and yet we shut down all these nuclear power plants because we want to go green.
There's also, and I want to point this out, when we quote unquote shut down these nuclear power plants, everyone thinks that they're just like the doors are shut and they disappear. No. They're still there. They have to be maintained. There's a ton of money dumped into them. And because you still have to maintain the structure, you still have to maintain a ton of. I have a friend that works at a decommissioned nuclear power plant doing engineering, and the amount of money that we still dump into them, and now we get absolutely nothing out of it whatsoever. And it's safer and cleaner than what the hippies from the 60s are trying to scare everybody into believing. That's what we've done to nuclear power is as big of a scam as the green energy has done to our idea about petroleum. It's the same thing. They demonize it and they say it's this horrible thing. Meanwhile, the technology we have today is unbelievable about it. And the amount of waste can be controlled, and it is not as much. Everyone thinks it's this huge bunker with all this, flowing green stuff. No. The rods are not that big, and they stack, and they can save them now and preserve them now in a much safer manner. The same thing with the oil. And my point is the leftist lunatic green imbeciles in this state have absolute, and it's a money scam, like the immigration with the redistricting. It's not about actually being green. It's about taking money away from quote unquote big oil and getting rich off of it themselves, and then controlling the flow of the spice, so to speak. Right. That's what it was about. It was never about saving. Look, if it was, half these companies that went out of business, like Solyndra and all the other ones that dumped millions and billions of dollars into, wouldn't have, because we couldn't have actually afforded to have them go out of business. But they could have went out of business because they don't matter. When something can just go out of business, it's not saving the earth. Like, we would not let that happen if, as a people, we'd be done.
No, and I'm very, listen, I always tell people I'm very in support of new technologies. I'm very in support of, clean water and fresh air and, things that are natural. And I'm full support of that, provided that the efficacy behind it actually works. But the only way to do that is to test it out in smaller rural areas or other areas that would volunteer themselves to test out the new technology, so that we can mitigate what we would need to do and to be aware of when we decide to go on a much larger scale with major metropolitan areas. I mean, it's common sense, but they don't operate in that functionality.
I call it the C test. It has to be safe, effective, and affordable. And if you
100%.
can all three things, you won't have to sell it to people. You won't have to give it all these different tax breaks. It will go like
sell itself
all by itself. Yep.
All by itself. And this is why, I looked at the Ivanpah solar panel farm that they just shut down in September of 2025, right? Just last year, just a few months ago. It didn't work. It was a $2.2 billion debacle. In fact, in order for them to even turn it on, they required combustible engines to kickstart it, and then it would start absorbing all the sun's energy. And then the rays that would come up from the solar panel farm was killing off birds in mid-flight.
Yeah.
And then, of course, all the wildlife surrounding the area. It was absolutely just, again, another backward project that didn't even work. That was all about going green. Texas was another prime example. When was it like 2 years ago? They froze over because they got rid of all of their gas, engines and stoves, and they went all electric and green. And then when the snow hit, they froze over. So what did they do? They went right back to anybody who had, some sort of combustible engine or, something in reserves to help them out, and then went back to burning logs. Like, it was crazy that it just proved
the Stone Age. Almost instantly, they got thrown into the Stone Age, which is just absolutely incredible.
They needed it. Yeah, they went to generators, and so for me, taxes have to make sense,
right?
And this deficit that we have here in the state of California is 100% easily fixable, and the amount of impingement upon an open market that our state has engaged in is also another reasoning why. When you punish, it's almost like when I had my own businesses, I've had to shut down a number of them in the beginning because of the fact that they were making it impossible during the COVID to even function. So, I had my own independent production company, and I had getting, veterans off the street. I was getting them their SAG cards. I was getting them breaking into Hollywood. I was using my own money for this. I had, finally built up after 15 years, connections with some, big Hollywood production studios. And then everything shut down because of the amount of legislation that came out that small companies like myself could not sustain because of the requirements that needed to be paid out in order for us to have medical staff, testing, constant masks, different kinds of foods that, had to be covered with different kinds of material. Like, it was so crazy that it forced businesses to shut down. So people were punished. Well, a lot of those laws are still in play right now. And the problem is that it punishes entrepreneurs, it punishes small businesses and mom and pop shops that are the backbone to any, good, strong economy. And so when you have businesses flourish, when you permit and you actually, praise and you help reward and you give incentivization for businesses to compete, right? More are going to pop up. And when that happens, that's more revenue for the state. It's not less, and you're not squeezing from anybody else. You're causing competition, which is the way businesses should be run, so that people can actually, businesses should be, competing for our money. And this is how but government has tied themselves with the unions to prop up an organization or a business industry that may be failing, but they refuse to let it go because, they steer our hand. And that's actually a violation of the Constitution, which is under the necessary proper clause under Article 1, Section 8, Clause 18. It's very simple. It lists out 18 authoritative powers, right? They can regulate the market, but they can't steer the market to go in any one direction. And when you know this, then they're impinging upon it because, they're in it for revenue. That's not the state's purview. That's not the country's purview. Their job is to ensure a monopoly doesn't form and doesn't turn into an ogaloppy, and industries don't get propped up by taxpayer money. Like, it's so easy when once I understand this.
it creates crony capitalism, which is why everyone's like, oh, capitalism is so horrible. And it's like, well, it is when crony capitalism is there because you have certain governments that are rewarding certain groups and then destroying other groups at their choice, not at the consumer's choice. Look at our healthcare. And we only get about 5 minutes left because my poor mods have been stuck around an extra 45 minutes, and I don't.
Sorry about that.
No. I'm sorry about that for them, but I'm not for the interview. You look at healthcare in this state specifically and how just jacked up it is, and a lot of it has to do with crony capitalism because they've propped up certain businesses and certain insurance companies, and they all work with the hospitals hand in hand, and there's no competition involved whatsoever. Though these federal fraud investigations have already shown us that Kaiser has put their hand in the cookie jar a couple times too many. It'll be interesting to see if any others. With that five or so minutes, Daniel, I'm going to give you all the time in the world to tell everybody why they should vote for you in 2026.
Thank you for that. I mean, I think the biggest thing is that the first thing I tell people is I don't have any intentions in being a governor for the government, but to be a governor for the people, and that is the people's governor. And the only way that works is if we get back to the Constitution, because there's nothing wrong with the Constitution. It works beautifully. It works impeccably when it's implemented the right way. And it's very easy to see where corrupt government definitely purposely subverts the right and the will of the people when they try to change the language, to change the perception so that they can pass this repugnancy. And when they do that, you know that they're not there for the people. They're there for self-preservation. They're there for their own pockets, or they're aligning, their own wealth, which is why we see a lot of them go in and come out. They go in making 115 and come out a millionaire. Right. And for me, I have no intentions in trying to be a career politician. I have every intentions in setting the nonsense straight. And that means I'm going to be focusing on cleaning house when it comes to corrupt government. I don't have any ties to any political group. I don't have any ties to the party. I put people over party. I'm here to ensure that when it comes to sovereignty and freedom, that means that the status of the people is to remain above government at all times, because that's how the Constitution is written. And if that is the case, then that means I'm your servant, not your leader. And I'm not here to lead you. I tell people I don't want to lead you. I want to serve you. I want to show you what it means to be a servant of the people, which means I'm actually giving up a number of my own personal rights for the sake of the people, because you're making me a gatekeeper of your rights. And that means those God-given endowments must prevail first. We don't have anybody like this. In fact, everybody forgets I'm a voter too, and I vote this way. I vote my conscience. And if people voted their conscience, the individual that they know should be in the office would be that person. And I believe wholeheartedly that person is me.
Well, Daniel, first of all, the website, Daniel for spelled out FOR, calgovernor.com. Make sure you check it out. You can also follow you on X. Where else can people find you? Just throw it all out there. You got it all.
If you go to my site, like you said, Daniel for Cal Governor, you can also find me on Instagram, YouTube, Rumble. I do have a True Social. I haven't really built it up. It's maybe 1 or 2 posts. X, Facebook, and TikTok. So TikTok has actually been growing. I just started it like a month ago, so I'm up to like 200. I did have 80,000 followers back during the recall, but they kept taking down my videos because of the exposure that I was showing. I showed the exposures of the worms inside the masks that also ended up on my wife's skin, and when I showed the videos, my TikTok blew up, and I started getting people following me for my candidacy. So I'm back on TikTok. And I pretty much, I'm available too by phone call. You can call I have a campaign line, and I'm actually the only person that really answers it. I do forward it over to my team members if I'm too busy, which is a lot. But usually they'll message back and say, hey, this is admin. Daniel will get back to you. So you can send me photos. You can send me images and messages. You can email me as well. And of course, I'm always taking donations and volunteers. So that's probably the biggest things, whether you want to donate a buck, $5, $100, whatever, it's great. If you want to donate, I've had a lot of big businesses like billboard businesses have given me and put me up on their billboard, and that's their endorsement. That's also in-kind donation. So if you don't want to give me money, that's okay, I get it. But if you've got a service that you think could be helpful for me for my campaign and getting it out there, I'm also happy to take that as well.
a true grassroots movement. Daniel Mercuri, sir, thank you so much for joining us this evening. We wish you well. Hopefully we can have you back before the big day.
Yeah, anytime. Absolutely.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Daniel.
Thank you, Sean. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
Thank you. And folks, thank you for sticking it out. I know we went extra. I think he was somebody that I think people in California need to take a look at. I think he is very intelligent. I think he has a lot of great ideas. And I think it's good to know your options in any election and to really get to know people, and not just on stage, not just, when they're out stepping on, the campaign trail, doing the hands, shaking hands and kissing babies, but actually have the conversation, actually hear them out, hear their thoughts. I want to have Daniel back, and I will sometime in the future. Thank you so much for joining us tonight on the Edge of Liberty. Thank you to the mods. And yes, thank you very, very much to the syndication guy over at KLRN Radio for keeping the stream up this whole time. We greatly appreciate it. I will be back Wednesday night, 8 p.m. Pacific, 11 on the East Coast, right here on the SHR Media Network, every Monday and Friday. Who had a great show tonight? Jersey Joe, the Reaver of Common Sense, 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 on the East Coast, Tuesday and Thursday morning. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., right here on SHR Media. You're going to have Mission Ready Men with my big friend, Big E, and he's Tuesday and Thursdays at 9 a.m. Pacific, noon on the East Coast. Then tomorrow night, the actual big man, the bulbous one himself, BZ's Berserk Bobcat Saloon, 8 p.m. Pacific, 11 on the East Coast. Check us out, shrmedia.com. We have a lot of great articles up over there. I have the links into Daniel's campaign over there if you want to learn more about Daniel. So please check it out. And you can follow me, the number 2 Against Tyranny. That's it for me. I am out.